Something shocking just happened at Coyote Pass, and the silence between Cody, Robyn, Meri, and Janelle said more than any argument ever could. Because what looked like a simple meeting might actually reveal the moment the Brown family story truly ended. And if you want the real details and breakdown that most people missed, make sure you hit subscribe right now, because this channel uncovers the reality behind the reality shows every single week. Cody and Robyn finally arrive at the dusty stretch of land that once symbolized the future of an entire family. But the moment that should have been simple turns into something strangely uncomfortable, because no one moves, no one waves, and no one even steps out of their car to greet the others. The silence hangs in the air like a heavy cloud, and it becomes obvious that this is not just another awkward gathering. This is the quiet aftermath of years of tension, disappointment, and broken expectations. Everyone had already been waiting for more than an hour, and yet when the moment finally arrives, the moment where they could at least acknowledge each other, nothing happens. Meri remains inside her car, Janelle stays inside hers, and Cody and Robyn sit there as if they are waiting for something else to happen, but nothing does. And that strange silence says more than any argument ever could. Because this land, known as Coyote Pass, was once described as the place where the Brown family would build their dream, the place where every wife would have a home, where the children could grow up together, and where their unusual but united family would prove that plural marriage could actually work. But standing there in that moment, it is impossible to ignore the truth. That dream is already gone, and the land that once represented hope now feels like a reminder of everything that slowly fell apart over the years. And when Robyn later explains why she did not greet Meri or Janelle, her answer surprises many people, because she calmly says that she does not believe in fakeness, and she suggests that pretending everything is fine when it is not would be dishonest. But the explanation leaves many viewers confused, because basic politeness is not the same thing as pretending everything is perfect. Saying hello to someone you have known for decades is not an act of deception, it is a simple act of respect, especially when the people involved once called each other family for more than 30 years. And that is why the moment feels so unsettling, because the silence does not appear accidental, it looks intentional, as if ignoring the other wives sends a message louder than any words ever could. And Meri later admits that the entire interaction made her feel invisible, as if her presence no longer mattered at all. She explains that no one even said hello, and no one said goodbye either. And that kind of treatment leaves a lasting impression, because it requires effort to completely ignore someone you once shared holidays, memories, and years of life with. And Janelle, who has often been the most practical voice among the wives, also describes the situation as extremely awkward, because from her perspective, there was no reason they could not simply act like adults for a few minutes while handling the paperwork needed to finally close this chapter of their lives. But the tension surrounding the meeting suggested that something deeper was happening beneath the surface, because this was not just about selling land. This was about closing the final connection between people who once believed they were building a shared future together. And the emotional distance on display made it clear that the family structure that once defined them no longer existed in the same way. And for viewers who have followed the Brown family story for years, the scene felt almost symbolic, because it represented the final stage of a long process where the relationships between Cody and his original wives gradually weakened, while his partnership with Robyn grew stronger and stronger over time. And that shift changed the balance of the entire family dynamic in ways that became impossible to ignore as the seasons passed. Because when Robyn first entered the family, she was introduced as someone who deeply valued unity. She spoke often about the importance of communication and understanding, and she frequently encouraged family meetings, discussions, and emotional conversations that were meant to keep everyone connected. She appeared determined to prove that the plural family could succeed if everyone worked hard enough to support each other. And that message became a central theme of the show for many years, because it offered viewers a glimpse into a lifestyle that was very different from traditional relationships, yet still centered around the idea of love, loyalty, and shared responsibility. But as time went on, the reality of maintaining that kind of family structure became more complicated. Disagreements about time, finances, and emotional support began to surface, and the strain placed on each wife grew more visible with every passing season. And through all of those challenges, Robyn often positioned herself as the person who understood Cody the best. She frequently explained his thoughts and decisions to the other wives, acting almost like a translator between him and the rest of the family. And while that role sometimes helped reduce conflict, it also gave her a unique level of influence, because being the person who interprets someone else's feelings means you also help shape how others understand those feelings. And over time, viewers noticed that Robyn's voice carried increasing weight during major decisions, especially when the family discussed big moves, like leaving Las Vegas for Flagstaff, or investing heavily in the Coyote Pass property, which was supposed to be the foundation of their shared future. And the move to Flagstaff itself became a turning point, because it required enormous financial changes and forced each household to adjust to a new environment, far away from the neighborhood where they had once lived close to one another. And while the decision was presented as an exciting new chapter, the reality quickly proved more complicated than expected, because building homes on the land did not happen as planned. Delays continued, and the vision of a shared community slowly faded, leaving the wives living separate lives scattered across different houses and dealing with growing emotional distance. And during that period, viewers began noticing subtle changes in how the relationships functioned. Conversations that once focused on unity began shifting toward individual priorities, and frustrations that had been quietly building for years started becoming impossible to hide. And eventually, one wife after another chose to move forward with her own life outside of the plural marriage, leaving Cody and Robyn together, while the rest of the family dynamic changed dramatically. And that transformation makes the silence at Coyote Pass even more powerful, because it reflects the final step in a long journey from unity to separation. The land that once symbolized the future of the entire Brown family now exists mainly as a financial asset that needs to be divided and sold. And the people who once imagined building homes next to each other now stand apart, handling legal documents instead of planning family gatherings. And in that context, Robyn's statement about refusing to be fake takes on a very different meaning, because the family she once encouraged everyone to protect no longer exists in the same form. And without that shared goal, there is little reason for the emotional performances that once helped keep the peace during difficult conversations. And some viewers believe that this shift explains why the atmosphere felt so cold during the meeting, because when the goal of unity disappears, the motivation to maintain polite appearances often disappears as well. And yet, the moment still leaves many questions unanswered, because viewers remember the years when the idea of family togetherness was treated as something worth fighting for, even when it required patience, compromise, and difficult conversations. And seeing that philosophy replaced with silence and distance creates a sense of finality that feels both surprising and inevitable at the same time. Because sometimes relationships do not end with loud, dramatic confrontations. Sometimes they fade slowly until one quiet moment makes it clear that the connection is already gone. And that moment at Coyote Pass appears to be exactly that, the point where everyone involved realizes that the dream they once shared has fully reached its conclusion. And from that point forward, the story of the Brown family will no longer be about building a plural household together, but about how each person chooses to move forward after the dream that defined their lives for so many years has finally come to an end. As the quiet tension settled over Coyote Pass, it became increasingly clear that this meeting was not simply about paperwork or property lines, but about the final unraveling of a story that had once been presented as a powerful example of family unity. For years, the Brown family had spoken about their shared dream with confidence and excitement. They described a future where each wife would build her own home on the land, where their children could grow up close together, and where their plural marriage would stand as proof that commitment and cooperation could overcome even the most unusual circumstances. But the reality unfolding during this meeting painted a very different picture. Because instead of laughter, planning, and hopeful conversations, there was distance, silence, and a feeling that everyone present understood the dream had quietly disappeared long before they arrived that day. And what made the situation even more complicated was the growing awareness that the breakdown of the family had not been caused by a single argument or decision, but by a slow accumulation of moments where trust was tested, expectations changed, and emotional support became uneven among the relationships. Over the years, viewers watched as the original wives began questioning whether the family dynamic was still balanced, whether everyone was receiving the same level of attention, respect, and partnership that had once been promised. And those questions became harder to ignore as the seasons continued, because the reality of plural marriage required constant communication, fairness, and compromise. And when any of those elements weakened, the strain quickly spread across the entire structure. And that strain became more visible during major turning points, like the move from Las Vegas to Flagstaff, which forced each household to leave behind a neighborhood where they had lived side by side and start over in a new city where they were scattered across separate homes, and new financial pressures followed the move, because purchasing land, maintaining multiple houses, and planning future construction created complicated responsibilities that required trust, cooperation, and long-term planning. And at first, the idea of Coyote Pass seemed like the perfect solution, a fresh start where everyone could eventually reunite and build the community they had always imagined. Yet as months turned into years, the progress stalled. Construction never truly began, and the property slowly transformed from a symbol of hope into a reminder of plans that were constantly postponed. And during that same period, emotional changes were happening within the family as well, because the original wives began re-evaluating their relationships and deciding what kind of future they wanted for themselves and their children. Some realized that the lifestyle they had supported for decades no longer gave them the happiness or stability they once believed it would provide. And those realizations eventually led them to make difficult choices about moving forward independently. And once those decisions were made, the entire balance of the family changed, because plural marriage relies on the presence of multiple partners sharing a commitment to the same structure. And when that structure begins to dissolve, the relationships connected to it inevitably transform as well. And that transformation is what made the final meeting at Coyote Pass feel so symbolic, because it represented the last official step in separating the shared dream from the reality that now existed. The land itself had once been described as the physical foundation of their future, a place where homes would stand side by side and where family gatherings would fill the open space with activity. But standing, and just like that, the dream of Coyote Pass quietly came to an end, proving that sometimes silence reveals the truth louder than any argument ever could. And if you want more deep dives into the biggest reality TV moments, make sure you subscribe and join this fast-growing community, because the next shocking breakdown is coming very soon. During the meeting, it was impossible to ignore that the vision had faded, leaving only the practical task of dividing and selling the property, so each person could move forward in a different direction. And during discussions about the paperwork, another layer of tension appeared when the possibility of confidentiality agreements was mentioned, because such agreements are usually associated with business negotiations rather than personal family matters. And the idea that someone might be asked to sign a document limiting what they could say publicly raised questions about why that step would even be necessary in a situation that had already been shared with viewers for many years. Meri openly wondered why silence would be required, and her reaction highlighted the lingering distrust that had developed over time. Because when relationships become strained, even routine legal processes can begin to feel complicated and uncertain. Janelle approached the documents carefully, reviewing every detail before agreeing to anything, which reflected her practical nature and her desire to ensure that the final arrangements were clear and fair for everyone involved. And that caution made sense, considering how many financial and emotional decisions had shaped the family journey over the past decade. Because behind the television cameras, there were real homes, real investments, and real futures at stake for multiple households and children. And those responsibilities required clarity, especially when closing such an important chapter of their lives. And as the discussion continued, the quiet atmosphere of the meeting seemed to mirror the larger transformation that had taken place within the family, because the people who once gathered regularly to discuss their shared goals were now meeting primarily to finalize the end of those plans. And that shift carried a certain emotional weight, even if no one openly expressed it in dramatic conversations. Sometimes the most meaningful moments happen without raised voices, because the realization of what has changed speaks louder than any argument. And the silence that surrounded the meeting suggested that everyone present understood the significance of what was happening, even if they experienced it differently. For some, it represented closure after years of uncertainty. For others, it may have felt like the loss of a vision that once defined their identity and their future. And for viewers watching the story unfold, the scene offered a powerful reminder that reality TV often captures real transitions in people's lives, moments where long-standing relationships evolve into something completely different from what they once were. The Brown family story began with the promise of unity, cooperation, and a shared commitment to an unconventional lifestyle. But as time passed, that promise faced challenges that gradually reshaped the family dynamic until the structure that once held everyone together no longer existed in the same way. And the final meeting at Coyote Pass symbolized that transformation because it brought together the past and the present in one quiet moment where dreams, expectations, and practical realities all intersected. And while the property itself may eventually change ownership, the memories connected to it will remain part of the larger story that viewers have followed for so many years. A story about relationships, growth, and the complicated process of redefining family when circumstances change. And as each person moves forward into a new chapter, the legacy of what they built together will continue to shape how the journey is remembered, not only by those who lived it, but also by the audience who witnessed its evolution from hopeful beginning to reflective ending.